Mielőtt elkezdenénk, lenne egy kis kérésem. Szeretném elérni az 1000 feliratkozót, ami számomra egy nagyon fontos mérföldkő. Kérlek, kattints a feliratkozás gombra. Neked csak egy kis kattintás, de számomra hatalmas motiváció, hogy új videókat készítsek. Nagyon köszönöm mindenkinek. My dear friend, settle in with your coffee and let me share a story that's been passed down through Texas families for generations. It happened in Cedar Ridge back in 1880, when the frontier was still teaching folks hard lessons about love and loss. This tale isn't about grand romance or fancy people. It's about ordinary souls finding grace in the midst of grief, much like many of us have had to do. Ruth Brennan stepped off that Northern Pacific train, believing she wasn't worth much to anybody. But the Lord has His own way of placing us right where we need to be. What unfolded over those next months proves that sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about passion, but about choosing to stay when leaving would be easier. Pour yourself another cup. This one's worth your time. The October heat hung over Cedar Ridge Station like a wool blanket nobody asked for. Ruth Brennan stood on that platform, her father's old carpetbag wearing a groove in her palm from 3 days of gripping. The leather handle had gone smooth as riverstone, and she knew every crack and fold by heart. Other folks pushed past, a drummer hawking Dr. Patterson's miracle tonic, 2 ladies in traveling suits that cost more than Ruth's father had made in a year, a young mother clutching her boy's hand like he might float clean away if she let go. The smell of coal smoke and hot metal mixed with something else. That particular Texas dust that gets in your nose and stays there. Ruth knew she ought to move, ought to look up and search for the man who'd paid her passage from Illinois. But her feet had gone heavy as church bells, and those $17 sewn into her corset, her running away money, as she thought of it, seemed to burn right through the cotton. You waiting on someone, miss? The station master peered at her through spectacles mended with baling wire, the kind of fix her father would have made. His badge read T. Morrison in letters gone green with age. Mr. Hartley, James Hartley, she managed. The widower with them 3 young ones. His voice dropped the way folks do when speaking of fresh grief. Usually sends his hired man, but that's him yonder by the water trough. Been standing there near an hour. Ruth's stomach did that peculiar turn it had been doing since she'd answered the advertisement. In her mind she'd pictured meeting him different, maybe in a parlor with antimassers on the chairs. Time to explain herself proper, not here with alkali dust coating her throat and perspiration pooling under her good collar. The man by the water trough stood alone, and that struck her as wrong right off. The newspaper notice had mentioned 3 children, but the buckboard behind him held only shadows in the bed, small shapes huddled together like barn kittens in a thunderstorm. James Hartley didn't look like a man advertising for a wife. He looked like a fence post that had weathered one too many blue northers, still standing but apt to crack if the next wind blew wrong. His hat, good beaver felt once upon a time, had gone shapeless as old bread. His Sunday coat hung loose over shoulders that suggested he'd been a bigger man before sorrow aided him. Ruth made herself walk. Each step felt like wading through Molasses Creek. The crowd thinned around them, folks sensing something private about to happen, the way people do when there's either going to be a wedding or a funeral, and nobody's quite certain which. Mr. Hartley. He turned slow like his bones pained him. Eyes the color of drought-dry earth took her in. The travel-stained dress she'd made from flour sacks dyed brown. The mended carpetbag. The face she knew wouldn't win any county fair ribbons. You're Miss Brennan. Not a question, a statement flat as hammered tin. Ruth felt the pretty speech she'd practiced for 3 days crumble like stale cornbread. She'd meant to be charming, or at least pleasant. Had planned to smile and say something about the journey, about looking forward to meeting the children, about how the good Lord provides in mysterious ways. You need to know something straight off, she heard herself say instead. The words came out wrong, too loud for polite company, but they kept coming like water through a busted dam after spring rains. I'm not pretty. Never have been. The Lord gave those gifts to my sister Mary. I can work harder than 2 men, and I know my letters and figures well enough to teach them. I can make biscuits from nothing but flour and hope, stretch $1 until it hollers, and Dr. Six stock better than most. but I got no illusions about what I am. James Hartley's expression didn't change one whit, but something shifted in how he stood, like a horse deciding whether to trust or bolt. Ruth's hands went still on that carpet bag for the first time since Dallas. She made herself look at him proper, not just glance, but really look the way her mother had taught her to size up a man's character. I answered your advertisement honest as Sunday. Said I was plain. Said I was 28 with no prospects. Said I'd been keeping house for my father till the consumption took him last winter. But standing here seeing you and knowing those are your babies in that wagon, I got to tell you, plainer than plain. She pulled in breath that tasted of locomotive smoke and dried manure from the stockyards. I'm not fit for any man, Mr. Hartley. Not in the way of proper wives who know how to pour tea and play parlor songs. But I can love your children. I can give them everything that's in me to give. And that's considerable. If that's enough, I'll get in your wagon. If it ain't, I got fare to get back to Illinois, though it'll leave me with nothing but the clothes on my back. The silence stretched longer than a Presbyterian sermon. Behind them, somebody dropped a crate and cursed, then apologized quick when ladies gasped. A horse in the stock pinned like it was commenting on the whole situation. The shadows in the wagon bed shifted, and Ruth caught sight of a small face. A girl, maybe 5, thumb stuck in her mouth like a cork in a bottle. James Hartley's jaw worked like he was chewing leather. His hands hanging at his sides opened and closed as if grasping for words that wouldn't come. When he finally spoke, his voice came out rougher than corn husks. My Sarah's been gone 6 months come Sunday. House has fallen apart faster than I can nail it back together. Children won't eat proper, just pick at their food like sparrows. Margaret, the oldest, she tries. Lord knows she tries, but she's only 10. Boy won't speak except to his sisters, and then only when he thinks I'm not listening. The youngest, Emma, she cries at night for her mama until her voice gives out. He stopped, swallowed hard enough that Ruth could see his Adam's apple bob. I advertised for a mother, not a wife. Someone to keep them alive and maybe, if the good Lord's willing, teach them to smile again. The marriage part, that's for appearance, for the church folks and the neighbors who've been talking. You understand what I'm saying? Ruth nodded, though her chest had gone tight as new boots. I understand, Mr. Hartley. Then get in the wagon. But neither of them moved. They stood there like they'd taken root. 2 people who just signed a contract without pen or paper, while the Texas sun beat down like the Lord's own judgment. The little girl in the wagon pulled her thumb out long enough to whisper something to the shadows beside her. James Hartley turned to look at his children, and Ruth saw his shoulders drop from defensive to something closer to defeated. That's Emma, the one with the thumb. Margaret's the oldest. She's there with the dark braids, spitting image of her mother. Thomas is the boy trying to disappear behind her. Ruth could see them clearer now. 3 small faces, all hollow-eyed and wary as barn cats that had been kicked once too often. Margaret had her arm around Thomas, who looked to be 8 or thereabouts. His face turned away like he couldn't bear to look at another disappointment. And Emma kept that thumb plugged tight, but her eyes tracked Ruth like she was memorizing every stitch and seam. They know why I'm here? Ruth asked soft. Told them I was meeting someone who might help with the house. Might, not would, like he was giving himself room to change his mind, send her back on the next train if she didn't measure up. Ruth hefted her carpet bag and started toward the wagon before her courage could leak out like air from a punctured tire. Ma'am. Margaret's voice stopped her cold. The girl had stood up in the wagon bed, skinny as a willow switch, but trying to look fierce as a mother hen. Yes. You going to stay? The question hung between them, heavy as wet washing. Ruth felt the weight of it. Not just was she staying for supper or staying the night, but staying through scarlet fever and broken bones. Or through failed crops and blue northers, through whatever the frontier might throw at them. If you'll have me. Margaret studied her long enough that perspiration trickled down Ruth's spine like a cold finger. Then the girl sat back down, scooting over to make room. Best get in then. It's 10 miles home and Papa don't like driving after dark. The coyotes get bold when the sun goes down. James Hartley made a sound that might have been surprise or might have been the ghost of a laugh gone rusty from disuse. He took Ruth's carpet bag, his fingers brushing hers for just a heartbeat, calloused, steady, careful as if he was handling eggs. He set it in the wagon bed, gentle-like, then offered his hand to help her up. Ruth climbed aboard and settled herself on the hard plank seat. The children arranged themselves in the bed behind her, only close enough to watch, but far enough to run if needed. She could feel their eyes on the back of her neck like tiny suns. "Your dress is ugly," Emma announced around her thumb. "Emma!" "Louise," Margaret hissed like a snake in the henhouse, but Ruth turned enough to look at the littlest one. "You're right as rain. It is ugly. Been washed so many times the colors plumb forgot what it used to be." Emma considered this with the seriousness only a 5-year-old can muster. Mama's dresses were pretty. She had one with little blue flowers. I expect they were pretty indeed. She died. "I know, honey. Are you going to die?" Ruth felt the other 2 children stop breathing, waiting. Everybody dies sometime. The Lord decides when. But I'm planning to stick around for a good long spell first, if that's acceptable to you. James climbed up beside her, all the wagon creaking like old bones. He gathered the reins but didn't signal the horses yet. "You certain about this, Miss Brennan? It ain't too late to change your mind." She looked at him sideways, his profile cut sharp against the afternoon light. Nose that had been broken once, jaw that hadn't seen a razor in days, lines carved deep as irrigation ditches by sun and sorrow. "I'm as certain as a body can be about anything in this life, Mr. Hartley." He made that sound again, definitely closer to a laugh this time, though it seemed to surprise him, and clicked to the horses. The wagon lurched forward, wheels grinding through dust thick as flour. Ruth grabbed the seat edge to steady herself and felt a small hand touch her elbow. Emma reaching through the slats to pat her arm just once before pulling back like she'd touched a hot stove. It wasn't much, just a touch light as butterfly wings. But Ruth felt it like a promise, like the first drops of rain after a long drought. She straightened her ugly dress, lifted her plain face to the Texas sun, and let the wagon carry her toward whatever the good Lord had planned. Behind them the station grew smaller, the train whistle echoed lonely across the prairie, and nobody said another word for 2 whole miles. The only sounds were wagon wheels, horse hooves, and somewhere far off, a meadowlark singing like it knew something they didn't. Now let's get back to the story. The wagon wheels found every blessed rut in the road. Ruth's teeth clicked together each time they dropped into another hole deep enough to plant corn in. James Hartley drove like a man who traveled this road blind, never slowing, never checking, and just letting the horses pick their way while he stared at something past the horizon that nobody else could see. 10 miles. Margaret had said 10 miles as well have been 10,000. With this silence pressing down thicker than August heat, the children had rearranged themselves in the wagon bed. Thomas pressed against the far corner, knees drawn up to his chest, watching Ruth sideways through hair that needed cutting. Margaret sat straighter than any 10-year-old ought to need to, her hands folded in her lap, but the knuckles white as fresh cotton. Emma had curled up with her head on Margaret's shoulder, that thumb still working steady as a butter churn. Ruth's trunk shifted and slid with each bump, the old rope holding it starting to fray where it rubbed against the metal corner. She reached back to steady it. And her sleeve caught on a splinter sticking up from the wagon bed. The tear sounded loud as thunder in all that quiet. "Leave it be," James said. First words in 3 miles by Ruth's count, but Ruth was already working the splinter free, careful not to make the tear worse. "Can't afford to ruin what little I got, Mr. Hartley." His hands tightened on the reins until the leather creaked like door hinges needing oil. A jackrabbit burst from the mesquite, zigzagging across their path in that crazy way they do. The horses shied, heads tossing, and James pulled them steady without seeming to think about it. Ruth grabbed the seat edge, her hip bumping against his. "Pardon," she said, scooting away proper. "Storm coming," he said instead of answering. He jutted his chin toward the north where clouds piled up like dirty sheep's wool. Need to beat it home." But he didn't hurry the horses. They kept the same steady pace while the wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain mixed with something dead. Probably a steer. Always was out here in cattle country. Emma whimpered in her sleep. Margaret pulled her closer, started humming something low and tuneless. Maybe Rock of Ages, but so soft Ruth couldn't be certain. Thomas turned his face away, but Ruth caught his shoulders shaking just a little, like he was holding something in. Clear's throat. There. James pointed with the whip handle. Ruth squinted through the dust, a windmill first, barely turning in the still air, then fence posts leaning like drunks after Saturday night. Then the house, the kitchen door stuck. James shouldered it twice before it gave way. And scraping across warped floorboards that hadn't seen wax in months. The smell hit Ruth first. Sour milk gone to cheese, mouse droppings, and something else, maybe a dead rat in the walls. Emma pressed her face into Margaret's skirt and made a small sound like a stepped-on kitten. "Tommy, fetch the lamp," James said, his voice flat as day-old beer. The boy didn't move. Margaret nudged him with her knee, gentle but firm. "Thomas, the lamp." He shuffled to a shelf by the door, brought down a Rochester lamp with a cracked chimney that had been mended with flour paste. His hands shook, trying to strike the match. James took the matchbox, struck one on his boot heel. The wick caught, throwing yellow light on what looked like the aftermath of something terrible. Dishes piled in the dry sink, and some growing green fuzz that might have been mold, or might have been something worse. A flour sack split open on the table like a gutted fish. Weevils crawling through what was left. A pot on the cold stove with something black and crusty stuck to the bottom that might have been beans in another life. Mouse scattered across the counter like someone had spilled peppercorns. The calendar on the wall still showed March with a red circle drawn around the 15th in what looked like a woman's careful hand. Ruth set her carpet bag by the door, walked to the stove, lifted the pot lid. Whatever had been beans or stew had turned to charcoal thick as roofing tar. She set the lid back without comment. "Margaret's been doing the cooking," James said. "Not making excuses, just stating fact like you'd mentioned the weather." "I tried," Margaret whispered, her voice small as a church mouse. Ruth opened the Hooser cabinet. The flour bin held maybe 2 cups, moving with weevils like the whole thing was alive. Sugar bin had mouse droppings mixed right in with the granules. She found a can of saleratus that might still be good, some salt in a box with a girl holding an umbrella on it, 3 potatoes growing eyes longer than her fingers, and a heel of bacon wrapped in paper gone translucent with old grease. "When did you last have supplies brought in?" Ruth asked, keeping her voice level as fresh poured concrete. "Don't rightly remember." She turned to look at him proper. He stood in the doorway still like he wasn't sure he belonged in his own kitchen anymore. The children huddled behind him like chicks behind a hen, though he didn't look much like protection. "You got laying hens?" "Few. They don't lay much since the coyote got in. Milk cow dried up 2 weeks back. Root cellar. Some preserves left from before. From before, meaning from when Sarah was alive. Everything in this house seemed to divide that way, before and after, with after being a slow slide into ruin. Ruth rolled up her sleeves, the fabric stiff with travel dust. "Margaret, I need water. 2 buckets if you can manage. Thomas, find me some wood that ain't all bark and splinters. Emma." The little girl peeked out from behind her father's legs like a rabbit from its hole. "You know where your mama kept her good dishes?" Emma nodded, thumbs still firmly in place. "Show me." The child crept forward, opened a cupboard low enough for her to reach without standing on tiptoes. Inside, china plates sat dusty but whole. Pink roses painted around the edges. Sarah's wedding dishes, most likely, saved for company that wouldn't come now. "We'll use those tonight," Ruth said. "Mama said they're only for special." Emma whispered around her thumb. First night special enough. Ruth found lard in a crock still good under the rancid top layer that she scraped off with a knife. The bacon would do if she cut away the green edges. Cornmeal in a tin the mice hadn't figured how to open yet. She could make hoe cakes, maybe stretch it to Johnny cakes if she was careful. Beans if she soaked them quick in hot water, though they'd still be hard as pebbles. Not much, but food. Anyway, Margaret came back struggling with 1 bucket, water sloshing over the sides and darkening her skirt. Thomas had an armload of wood, half of it too green to burn proper. Ruth didn't comment on either. She worked the pump handle on the stove to get air to the firebox, fed it the driest pieces until the stovetop started to tick with heat. "Sit," she told them all. "This will take a spell." They arranged themselves around the table like they'd forgotten how it was done. James at the head where the man sits, children on one side leaving the foot empty. Sarah's place, Ruth figured. She didn't take it. Wouldn't be right. She stood at the stove mixing cornmeal and water, adding the last of the good lard and a pinch of salt. Papa usually reads from the book, Thomas said. First words she'd heard from him that weren't prompted by his sister. James looked at the Bible on the shelf, covered in dust thick enough to plant seeds in. Not tonight. The hoe cakes sizzled when Ruth dropped them on the griddle, smelled like comfort, but like something normal in all this wrongness. She found a jar of preserves in the cellar when she'd gone down for the lard. Dewberry, the label in a woman's careful hand. Sarah's hand. The wax seal was still good. She pried it open with a knife, the sweet smell fighting with the mouse stink and old grease. They ate in silence except for spoons scraping plates and Emma's little humming sounds she made while eating. The children cleaned their dishes complete, even Emma licking preserves off her fingers when she thought nobody was looking. Ruth made herself eat slow, watching them from the corner of her eye. Margaret kept glancing at her mother's china roses like they might disappear. Thomas kicked the table leg in a steady rhythm. Thump, 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 like a nervous heart. Emma hummed between bites, some tune Ruth almost recognized. Bedtime, yeah, James said when the last plate was empty, his voice rough as burlap. But Papa, Margaret started bed. The word came out harder than he probably meant. They all flinched. The children started toward the stairs that led up from the corner of the kitchen. They stopped at the bottom, looking back like lost calves. Do we say prayers? Margaret asked, her voice uncertain as spring weather. James's jaw worked side to side. If you want. Mama. Always. I know what your mama did. The words came out sharp enough to draw blood. Margaret flinched again. Ruth found herself moving without thinking about it, putting herself between the children and their father's grief that came out like anger. I know now I lay me down, Ruth said, quiet as she could make her voice. If that would suit. Emma nodded so hard her braids bounced like pump handles. Ruth climbed the narrow stairs with them, each step creaking a complaint. James stayed below and she could feel him listening to their feet overhead. 3 doors upstairs, all open. The children led her to one with 2 beds. Quilts tumbled every which way like a storm had been through. A ragged doll with button eyes lay on the floor, one arm torn nearly off. Tommy sleeps there. Margaret pointed to the smaller bed. Emma and me here. Ruth straightened the quilts, tucked them proper with hospital corners like her mother had taught her. The children knelt by the beds without being told, hands folded. Ruth knelt too, her knees protesting against the hard pine floor. Now I lay me down to sleep, she started, her voice steady. 3 small voices joined in, thin as thread. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. Emma's voice wavered on the next line. If I should die before I wake, she started crying. Not loud wailing, just tears rolling down her cheeks while her mouth kept moving through the prayer. Margaret pulled her close, finished the words for both of them. Thomas stayed rigid as a fence post, eyes squeezed shut so tight his whole face scrunched. Ruth sat back on her heels, watching these children who knew death lived in their house now, real as the mice in the walls and the dust on every surface. They'd seen their mother put in the ground. They knew how prayers didn't always get answered the way you wanted. Into bed now, she said, soft as cotton. They climbed under the quilts without argument. Emma held her arms up, and Ruth found herself leaning down, letting those small arms circle her neck just for a heartbeat. You smell different, Emma whispered against Ruth's ear. Not like Mama. Like outside. I know, honey. Will you be here tomorrow? Lord willing, I will. Ruth stood, turned to go. Margaret's voice stopped her at the door like a cotton nail. Miss Brennan, your room's at the end of the hall. That was Mama and Papa's room. Papa sleeps downstairs now. Ruth nodded, pulled the door closed, gentle, stood in the dark hallway, listening to them settle. Emma's thumb sucking, Thomas turning over and over like he couldn't get comfortable. Margaret whispering something that might have been another prayer. She walked to the end room, pushed open the door that was already ajar. The bed was made perfect with a wedding ring quilt, like someone might come back any minute. A blue dress hung on a peg, the one with little flowers Emma had mentioned. A hairbrush on the dresser still had long dark hairs wound through the bristles. The pillow on the left side still held the indent of a head. On the nightstand, a medicine bottle with maybe 2 spoonfuls of laudanum left, and beside it, a daguerreotype in a brass frame. A young woman, beautiful even in the stiff way people had to hold for pictures, with the same dark braids Margaret wore. Ruth backed out like she'd walked in on something private, closed the door with a soft click, made her way downstairs in the dark, feeling along the wall. James sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, his hands wrapped around a cup that must have gone cold an hour ago. "I'll take the barn," Ruth said. He looked up slow like he was swimming up from deep water. "What? The barn? Till things are sorted proper wouldn't be right. Hate me taking her room. Oh, you can't sleep in the barn. The rats alone would. I've slept worse places." His hands spread flat on the table, fingers splayed like he was trying to hold something down. "There's a room under the stairs. Was supposed to be for a hired girl. Sarah always meant to hire help, but..." He stopped. The sentence hanging there unfinished like so many things in this house. He stood, walked past her toward the front of the house. Ruth heard a door open, then his footsteps going away. She found the room under the stairs by feel, bigger than a closet, smaller than proper, a narrow bed with a cornhusk mattress that rustled when she sat on it. One quilt that smelled of must and old lavender, no window, no lamp. She felt her way in the dark, set her carpet bag on the floor, started to unbutton her dress, then stopped. Something scratched in the walls, mice for certain, maybe rats. The house settled around her with little creaks in size, like an old woman getting comfortable, but under that another sound, crying, soft, muffled, like it was pressed into a pillow, but crying all the same. Not the children. This came from the front of the house where James had gone. Ruth sat on the narrow bed, fully dressed, hands folded in her lap like she was in church, listened to a grown man try to smother his grief in the dark, wondered what she'd gotten herself into, wondered if she was strong enough for this much sorrow. The crying stopped, started again, stopped, then footsteps, slow and heavy as a funeral march, coming back toward the kitchen. They paused outside her door. She held her breath, waiting, a hand pressed against the door. She could hear the wood creak slightly, then James's voice so quiet she almost missed it. "Sarah died in that room upstairs, in that bed, just so you know why I can't." His voice broke off. The footsteps moved away. Ruth lay back on the cornhusk mattress, still in her traveling dress. Through the thin door she heard him moving in the kitchen, maybe banking the fire. Then a sound she didn't expect. James was winding a clock. The steady tick-tick-tick filled the house like a heartbeat starting up again. But as he wound it, she heard him say something under his breath. Sarah's name over and over, like a prayer or a penance, and then so soft she might have imagined it. "Help me. I don't know how to do this without you." Ruth's eyes opened to pure black. No window in the closet room meant no way to tell if it was midnight or near dawn, except by the ache in her back from the cornhusk mattress. She lay still, listening to the house breathe around her. Somewhere above a board creaked, then another, then the soft pad of bare feet trying not to make noise. She felt for her dress buttons in the dark, fastened the ones that had come loose and slept. The door opened without a sound. She'd rub soap on the hinges before bed, an old habit from caring for her father during his final illness. The kitchen sat gray, and what must be pre-dawn light seeping through the windows. James already hunched over the table, coffee cup between his hands like he was praying to it. Steam rose from the pot on the stove. He'd been up long enough to make coffee then. She poured herself a cup, the bitter smell cutting through the lingering mouse stink. "Ah, didn't expect you up," he said without looking at her. "Always been early rising." She opened the Hoosier cabinet, checked what she had to work with. The weevils had been busy in the night. She'd have to sift 3 times to get enough clean flour for biscuits. Started anyway, found a bowl without cracks, the sifter rusty but serviceable. "That's Sarah's bowl," James said, then stopped himself. "Was Sarah's bowl." Ruth kept sifting, watching the bugs fall through with the first pass. "More bugs than flour. Need to use what's here, Mr. Hartley." The first sift left mostly weevils. She took them to the back door, tossed them out for the chickens if any were left to eat them. Started again. James watched her work. his coffee going cold between his palms. "Why'd you really come?" he asked suddenly. Her hands kept moving. Sift, shake. It sift again. "Told you yesterday." "No, I mean, why'd you leave Illinois?" "Really? Leave?" "Father died. House went to my brother Samuel. His wife made it clear I wasn't welcome to stay." "So you answered an advertisement to marry a stranger." Ruth found the saleratus, tested a pinch with vinegar from a bottle on the shelf. Still good. It fizzed up proper, seemed better than the alternatives, which were. She looked at him straight for the first time that morning. "Domestic work in Chicago for folks who'd treat me worse than a dog. Factory maybe if they'd take a woman my age, or taking in washing till my hands gave out complete." She went back to mixing. This seemed more honest. Emma appeared in the doorway like a little ghost in her white nightgown, dragging a one-armed rag doll, thumb firm in her mouth. She stood there swaying. Not quite awake, but not asleep either. "Bad dream, honey?" Ruth asked. Emma nodded, walked straight to her father, climbed into his lap without asking permission. He held her automatic, his chin resting on her tangled hair. "Mama's not in heaven," Emma announced around her thumb. James went stiff as a corpse. "Emma, she's in the ground. I saw them put her there, Mr. Henderson and Mr. Miller and Papa. They put her in a box and then in the ground." Ruth kept working the dough, not looking at them, feeling the air in the room go tight as a fiddle string. "That was just her body," James said, his voice strangled. "Her soul." "What's a soul look like?" James's mouth opened, closed, opened again with nothing coming out. Ruth turned from the stove, wiping her hands on the apron she'd found hanging behind the door. Sarah's apron. But someone had to use it. "You ever see sunlight coming through leaves, Emma? How it moves and dances, but you can't quite catch it." Emma nodded, thumb still in place. "That's what I figure souls are like. The part that moves and dances. Body is just the jar that holds it for a spell." Emma considered this with the deep seriousness of 5-year-olds. "Mama's jar broke." "It did. Is your jar going to break?" "Someday. Everything does, but not planning on it anytime soon." Margaret came down the stairs already dressed. Braids need his pin money. Thomas behind her, shirt buttoned wrong, so one tail hung lower than the other. They stopped when they saw Emma in their father's lap, like it was something strange. "Sit," Ruth said. "Biscuits will be ready directly." She'd found sorghum molasses in the root cellar the night before. "I only half crystallized. Mixed with the last of the good lard, it would make a decent spread." The children watched her pull the biscuits from the oven. They weren't pretty. The weevily flour made them gray-looking, but they smelled like morning ought to smell. "Haven't had biscuits since—" Thomas stopped himself. "Since March," Margaret finished for him. "Since Mama took sick." They ate careful, like they'd forgotten the rhythm of regular meals. Emma got molasses on her chin and didn't wipe it off. Thomas licked his plate when he thought nobody was watching. Margaret tore her second biscuit into tiny pieces, making it last like it might be the last biscuit in creation. "Need supplies," Ruth said, stacking the empty plates. "What's in that cellar won't last another day." James pushed back from the table. "I'll go to town later." "I should go with you. Learn the merchants, the prices, who's honest, and who will cheat a woman shopping alone. You stay here with them, not a request, an order." Ruth nodded, started clearing dishes. Margaret jumped up to help without being asked, carrying plates to the dry sink, careful as eggs. "I can wash," Margaret offered. "Water needs heating first. That pump out back still works." "Sometimes, if you hold your mouth right." They worked together quiet, Margaret pumping water while Ruth heated it on the stove. Thomas took Emma outside to the privy. Through the window filled with grease and dust, Ruth watched him hold Emma's hand, patient when she stopped to squat down and look at a bug. Patient like a mother would be. "Papa cries at night," Margaret said sudden. He's scrubbing a plate like it had personally offended her. Ruth kept washing, didn't look at the girl. "He thinks we don't know, but the walls are thin as paper. Everything carries. Grief's a hard thing." "Do you cry for your papa?" Ruth handed her another plate to dry. "Sometimes when I remember something particular, like how he'd whistle while shaving, or the way he'd save the coffee grounds to put on his roses." "Does it stop?" "The crying gets quieter like a bell ringing far off. still there but not so loud it drowns out everything else. Margaret dried that plate with the focus of a surgeon. Mama got sick at Christmas. The baby came too early and wouldn't stop bleeding. She got thinner and thinner, like something was eating her from inside, like a bird in winter with no seeds. Ruth's hand stayed steady in the wash water, though her throat had gone tight. Papa wouldn't let us see her the last week. Said she needed quiet, but I snuck in once. Margaret's voice dropped to barely there. She didn't look like Mama anymore, like something pretending to be her. The back door banged open hard enough to rattle the windows. Thomas and Emma back from outside. Emma carrying something cupped in her small hands like water. Found eggs. She opened her hands to show 2 brown eggs, one still warm. The hens came back. Ruth dried her hands on the apron. Show me where. They trooped outside, Emma leading like a tiny general. Behind the barn, in what used to be an equipment shed, 5 scraggly hens had made themselves a rough home. Feathers scattered everywhere, suggested a fox or coyote had been visiting. But these 5 had survived, skinny but laying. Need to fix that coop proper, Ruth said, examining the broken slats. Thomas, can you handle a hammer? He nodded eager, first time she'd seen him show interest in anything. Ruth found tools in the barn hung neat on pegs like someone cared about them once, boards that might work if they weren't too warped. They spent the morning rebuilding, Thomas hammering while Margaret held boards steady, and Emma gathered more eggs from various hiding spots, 7 total from all her searching. Could make custard with these, Ruth said, counting them in her apron. If we had milk. Henderson's might sell some, Margaret offered. They're 2 miles north. Mrs. Henderson was Mama's friend. Ruth looked at James's wagon, still sitting where he left it, horses already unhitched. Your papa won't mind if we borrow it. He's in the back field, Thomas said, but pointing toward a distant figure. Won't even know if we're quick about it. Ruth knew she should wait, ask permission proper, but the children's faces had something in them she hadn't seen yet. Hope, maybe, or just interest in something beyond grief. Get a clean jar with a tight lid. And Thomas, you know the way. He was already running for the house. Margaret grabbed Emma's hand. We'll be good, Miss Brennan. Promise we'll be good. They climbed into the wagon, Ruth taking the reins. The horses knew the way once Thomas pointed them north. The road ran between fence posts, some standing straight, most leaning like drunks. Mesquite and sage stretched to the horizon, broken by scraggly oaks that looked like they'd given up on pretty and settled for stubborn. Oh, that's where Mama taught me to shoot. Margaret pointed to a clearing with old cans still lined on a fallen log. Papa didn't know. Said ladies don't need guns, but Mama said Texas ladies do. Your Mama could shoot better than Papa, though we weren't supposed to say. She was from Kentucky Hill Country where girls learn young. The Henderson place appeared like something from a picture book. Whitewashed house, garden still producing, wash on the line dancing in the breeze. Mrs. Henderson came out before they'd even stopped, wiping her hands on her apron. A woman maybe 35, worn down to wire and gristle but still moving. Margaret Hartley, that's you driving? No, ma'am. This is Miss Brennan. She's helping us. Mrs. Henderson's eyes took in everything. Ruth's plain dress, her work rough hands. Oh, the way the children stayed close but not too close, like they weren't sure what she was yet. Helping. Mrs. Henderson said the word like she was tasting it. That's what they're calling it now. Ruth met her stare straight on. It's what it is for now, ma'am. Something in Ruth's tone made Mrs. Henderson step back, reassess. Well, you need something milk if you have it to spare. Can pay cash money. Don't need payment. Lord knows those children need. She stopped herself. Wait here. She came back with a full pail, still warm and foaming. Bessie's producing good. You come back when you need more. Thank you kindly. Mrs. Henderson reached out, touched Margaret's cheek, gentle as a mother would. Your Mama was a good woman. Don't let anyone tell you different. Margaret nodded, her eyes going bright with unshed tears. They drove back careful, the milk sloshing in the pail. But when they pulled up to the house, James stood by the barn, arms crossed like a fence gate. Where did you take them? Henderson's for milk. His jaw worked like he was chewing words too hard to swallow. You don't take my children anywhere without asking. Not anywhere, Papa. Emma started. House now. The children scattered like quail. Ruth climbed down from the wagon, faced him square. I know what they need. What they don't need is another woman thinking she can waltz in and replace. He stopped, turned away, but not before Ruth saw his face crumple like paper in a fist. I'm not trying to replace anyone, Mr. Hartley, Ruth said to his back. He walked into the barn. The door slammed hard enough to send the chickens squawking. Ruth carried the milk inside, found the children sitting at the table, quiet as mice in church. She made custard with those 7 eggs, slow and careful, adding the last of Sarah's vanilla, the smell filling the kitchen like a blessing. He didn't mean it, Thomas said, watching her stir. I know. Well, he gets angry since Mama. Not angry, Margaret corrected. Scared. They ate the custard in silence, sweet and smooth on their tongues, a comfort food when comfort was scarce. Outside, hammering started in the barn, James working out whatever needed working. Emma scraped her dish clean with her finger, looked up at Ruth with those serious eyes. Will you teach me to make this? If you'd like. Mama was going to teach me things, but then she couldn't. Ruth reached across the table, smoothed a loose curl back from Emma's forehead. The child didn't pull away. Then we'll start tomorrow, Ruth said. Margaret stood sudden. Ut walked to the cupboard, pulled out a wooden recipe box, set it on the table with the reverence of a preacher handling the Bible. Inside, recipes and careful handwriting. A pressed violet between wax paper, a silver thimble worn smooth. These were Mama's, Margaret said. She pulled out one card, handed it to Ruth like it might break. That's her biscuit recipe. Yours were good, but they weren't hers. Margaret nodded. Ruth read the recipe, same as hers mostly except for a tablespoon of sugar. Such a small difference, but it would change everything. Tomorrow we'll make these, Ruth said, through the window. The hammering stopped. James stood in the barn doorway watching the house. Ruth raised her hand. Not quite a wave. He didn't wave back, but he didn't turn away either. Miss Brennan. Emma tugged her sleeve. Yes, your jar is not broken. Ruth looked down at the child's worried face. No, honey, it's not good. Emma climbed into her lap without invitation, surprising them both. Can you hum like yesterday in the wagon? Ruth hummed low and steady, an old hymn her mother sang while churning butter. Shall we gather at the river, though she didn't sing the words? Emma's weight settled against her chest, warm and trusting as a cat. Margaret and Thomas stayed at the table, not moving closer, but not moving away either. The afternoon sun slanted through the dirty window, painting everything gold. James still stood in the barn doorway, watching. The empty milk pail sat by the sink, waiting to be washed. Then Ruth saw it, pushed behind the flour bin where she hadn't noticed before. Sarah's sewing basket, the lid partly open. Inside, visible even from where she sat. A tiny half-finished baby gown. White cotton with the beginning of embroidered roses, needles still threaded, stuck in the fabric like Sarah had just set it down and meant to come back. Thunder rolled across the prairie like the Lord himself was moving furniture in heaven. Ruth woke to Emma standing beside her narrow bed, nightgown soaked through with sweat, hair plastered to her head. My head hurts bad, Emma whispered. Ruth touched the child's forehead, burning hot, skin dry as old leather despite the sweat. She sat up quick, pulled Emma onto the bed. The child's body felt light as kindling. How long has your head been hurting, honey? Since supper. Didn't want to say. Papa gets that scared look. Lightning flashed through the crack under the door, showing Emma's face clear for a heartbeat. Her eyes had that glassy shine Ruth had seen before. 3 children in their Illinois town, all dead within a week when scarlet fever came through. Can you walk? Emma nodded, but swayed like a sapling in wind when Ruth stood her up. Ruth carried her to the kitchen, set her in a chair, gentle as handling eggs, found matches, lit the Rochester lamp. Emma's face in that yellow light made Ruth's stomach drop like a stone in a well, red patches burning on her cheeks, lips cracked and bleeding at the corners. Ruth pumped water into a basin, soaked a clean cloth. The cool water against Emma's skin made the child whimper like a kicked puppy. Need to fetch your papa. No, please, he'll get that look again. The same look when Mama. But Ruth was already moving through the house. She found James's door, knocked hard enough to hurt her knuckles. What? His voice came thick with sleep. Emma's sick. Real sick. Fever. The door flew open before she finished talking. James stood there in his union suit, hair sticking up every which way. How bad? Can't say for certain, but it's proper fever, not just a cold. He pushed past her, ran to the kitchen in bare feet. Emma reached for him with both arms and he gathered her up, her head flopping against his shoulder like her neck wouldn't hold it. Baby girl, Papa's here. Papa's got you. My head hurts. Papa hurts worse than when I fell off the fence. He looked at Ruth over Emma's head and she saw it plain. The same terror that must have started with Sarah. The look of a man watching sickness creep into his house again like smoke under a door. What do we do? The question came out cracked down the middle. Ruth already had the stove going. Of feeding it kindling. Willow bark tea first if you have any. Cool cloths for the fever. Try to keep it from climbing too high, that's all we can do. Unless you want a ride for Dr. Morrison. 30 miles in this storm. Take all night, maybe longer. Roads will be mud soup. Thunder shook the windows hard enough to rattle the glass. Rain started coming down like nails on the roof. Then we do what we can here. Margaret appeared in the doorway. Thomas right behind her like a shadow. They took in the scene. Emma limp in James's arms, Ruth heating water, their father's face naked with the kind of fear children shouldn't see. Is she? Margaret couldn't finish the sentence. She's sick, Ruth said, keeping her voice level as a tabletop. Need you to find clean cloths, sheets if you have them, we can tear into strips. Thomas. Or check your mama's medicine box for willow bark. They ran like their feet were on fire. Ruth made James sit with Emma still in his arms. The child's breathing came quick and shallow like a bird's. Her fingers plucked at nothing, catching invisible threads in the air. Mama, Emma mumbled, eyes rolling white. Mama, it's dark. James's face collapsed like a house with the foundation kicked out. Ruth took Emma from him before he could squeeze her too tight in his panic. She doesn't know what she's saying. Fever makes them confused, makes them see things that aren't there. Sarah started like this. Just a headache, she said, then fever, then the bleeding that wouldn't stop, then this isn't that you don't know. You can't know. Ruth looked him dead in the eye. No, but we're not giving up before we even try. Margaret ran back with an armload of sheets. On some still good, some already torn. Thomas had a wooden box, bottles rattling inside like bones. Ruth found the willow bark, crushed it fine between 2 spoons, steeped it in water hot enough to steam. Hold her head up, Ruth told James. They got a few spoonfuls down Emma's throat before she turned away, gagging. Ruth soaked cloths in cool water, laid them on Emma's forehead, neck, wrists. The fever burned right through them, cloths going warm in minutes like they'd been ironed. Margaret, keep bringing fresh water. Thomas, tear these sheets into strips wide as your hand. They worked without talking. The storm raged outside, wind screaming through gaps in the walls like something trying to get in. The lamp flame danced with each gust. Emma twisted in James's arms, mumbling words that made no sense. The chickens are in the house, she said clear as Sunday morning. They're wearing Mama's good dress. No chickens, baby, James whispered into her hair. They are. They're having tea. Ruth changed the clothes again. Emma's skin felt hotter, like touching a stove lid. She mixed more willow bark tea, stronger this time, got another spoonful down before Emma's stomach rebelled. She won't keep it down, James said, as Emma vomited across his shirt. Thin yellow bile. She has to. No choice. Ruth tried again. This time Emma swallowed, then immediately heaved, whole body convulsing. James held her while she retched, didn't even flinch at the mess. I'm sorry, Papa. I'm sorry. Didn't mean to be sick. Nothing to be sorry for, baby girl. Nothing at all. Ruth cleaned them both with a wet cloth, changed Emma into a fresh nightgown. Margaret brought the child seemed smaller somehow, like the fever was burning her down to nothing but bird bones and tissue paper. Temperature still climbing, Ruth said, feeling Emma's neck. She'd seen it happen. Fever getting so high the brain cooked like an egg. Children who survived but were never right after, talking to people who weren't there, forgetting their own names. Thomas, is there ice anywhere? Spring house maybe. No ice, but the spring water's cold as January. Get buckets of it, many as you can carry. He ran out into the storm without even grabbing a coat. Ruth heard him slam into the barn, probably getting buckets. Margaret stood frozen, watching Emma's eyes roll back. Need you here, Ruth told her firm. Your papa needs to see you're strong. Margaret straightened her spine like someone had put a board down her back. Started tearing more strips without being asked. Thomas came back soaked to the skin, hair plastered flat, lugging 2 buckets of spring water so cold Ruth's hands ached just touching it. She soaked fresh cloths, laid them on Emma. The child gasped, tried to push them off, cold, too cold, burning and freezing. I know, baby. James held her hands. I know it hurts. They worked through the night. Ruth lost track of time, just the rhythm of cool cloths, spoonfuls of tea, Emma's fevered rambling. Sometimes she called for her mother. Sometimes she sang bits of Jesus Loves Me, but with the wrong words. Once she laughed bright and clear as Christmas morning, then went limp again. Why is she laughing? James asked, fear making his voice high. Fevered dreams. Her mind somewhere else right now. Where? Ruth didn't answer, kept changing cloths. The storm peaked around what might have been 3 o'clock in the morning. Lightning struck close, the crack and flash happening at the same exact instant. Emma screamed, fought against James's hold with strength that shouldn't have been in such a small body. The house is burning. Let me go. The house is burning. No fire, Emma. You're safe. Papa's got you. But she kept struggling, wild as a caught rabbit. Ruth held her legs while James held her arms. Emma bucked between them, screaming about fire, about birds with people faces, about her mother calling her from the garden. Then suddenly she went rigid as a board. Her eyes rolled back complete. Her body started shaking. Quick little tremors Ruth recognized with a sick drop in her stomach. Seizure. Don't hold her down. Just keep her from hitting anything. James laid her on the floor quick. Ruth pushed the chairs back. Emma's body jerked and twitched, foam in her mouth pink with blood where she'd bitten her tongue. Margaret pressed against the wall, hands over her face. Thomas stood frozen, water bucket still in his hands, water sloshing over his bare feet. The seizure lasted forever, probably only 30 seconds, but Ruth counted each one. Then Emma went limp as a dead cat, breathing, but gone somewhere else. Is she? James couldn't finish. Ruth felt Emma's forehead, still burning, but maybe. Her hand stayed there, testing. Maybe a hair cooler. Seizure might have broke the fever's climb. Sometimes happens that way. Sometimes. Other times it means Ruth stopped. No point saying what they all feared. They lifted Emma back onto James's lap, her nightgown soaked through with sweat. Ruth changed it again. All working around James's desperate grip. Emma's breathing sounded different, deeper, more regular, less like a trapped bird. Look! Margaret pointed with a shaking finger. Sweat beaded on Emma's forehead. Real sweat, not the dry heat from before. Ruth touched it, cool and clammy. Thank God, James whispered. First time Ruth had heard him invoke the Lord since she'd arrived. Thank you, God. Emma's eyes fluttered open, focused this time, really seeing them instead of through them. Papa, right here, baby girl, right here. I'm all wet. I know that's good, means the fever's breaking. Emma turned her head, saw Ruth, blinked slow. You stayed, said I would. Emma's hand found Ruth's grip, weak as a newborn kitten's. Mama didn't stay. The kitchen went silent except for rain on the roof, gentler now, and the clock ticking on the mantel. Your mama didn't want to leave, Ruth said carefully. Sometimes the body doesn't give us a choice. Sometimes it just gives out. Emma studied her with those serious eyes older than 5 years should be. But you'll try to stay. Ruth squeezed the small hand gentle. I'll try my very best. Emma nodded, satisfied with that promise, closed her eyes, fell into real sleep. Not fevered unconsciousness, but actual rest. They sat there as dawn crept gray and watery through the windows. The storm had passed, leaving everything dripping and fresh. James still held Emma, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever spell was keeping her breathing regular. Margaret had fallen asleep against Thomas's shoulder. Thomas fought to keep his eyes open, standing guard like a tiny soldier. Ruth stood, knees creaking like door hinges. He started cleaning up the mess of cloths and buckets, found James watching her with something she couldn't read in his eyes. You knew what to do, he said quiet. Helped my mother with sick folks back home. Learned by watching. Sarah didn't know. When she got sick herself, she kept saying she didn't know what to do. I didn't know either. Useless as tits on a boar. Ruth wrung out a cloth, water running through her fingers. Different kinds of knowing. Sarah knew things I don't. Like what? Ruth looked at the sewing basket, that tiny, half-finished gown visible through the gap in the lid. Like how to make a house feel like a home, how to make a man feel loved, how to grow roses in drought. I just know how to keep folks breathing. James shifted Emma in his arms, really looking at Ruth for maybe the first time. Maybe we need both kinds of knowing. Before Ruth could answer, Emma stirred, opened her eyes clear and bright. "I'm hungry," she announced like it was the most important news in the world. Margaret woke at that, scrambling up. "She's hungry? That's good, right? That means she's better." Ruth felt Emma's forehead again. Cool as spring water. Normal. The crisis passed like the storm. "That's very good. Thomas, can you?" She turned. Thomas had slid down the wall, finally asleep, sitting up on the floor, empty bucket still clutched in both hands. His feet were blue-white with cold from all his trips to the spring house in the rain. Ruth grabbed a quilt from the other room, covered him where he sat, then started making porridge with the last of the oats, adding extra sorghum to tempt Emma's appetite. "Miss Brennan." Ruth turned. James still held Emma but was looking at Ruth. "Thank you." Or 2 words, but weighted with everything. With Sarah's death, with his terror, with the night they just survived. Ruth nodded, went back to stirring porridge, but she felt something shift in the kitchen, subtle as wind changing direction. They'd crossed some line in the dark. No going back now. She served the porridge. Emma ate 3 bites before falling asleep again, chin on her chest, spoon still in her hand. Margaret laughed. First time Ruth had heard it. Even James's mouth twitched toward what might become a smile someday. Then Ruth saw it on the table where Emma had been lying during the seizure. Drops of blood on the torn sheet strips. Too much blood for a bitten tongue. Ruth found the blood again that morning, checking Emma's bedding while the child played with her rag doll in the kitchen. Just spots already dried brown on the pillowcase. From the seizure 3 days back, children sometimes bit their tongues hard enough to bleed. She folded the pillowcase, said nothing. Emma bounced around the kitchen now, fever forgotten, chattering, Clear's throat about the chickens and whether they dreamed. The garden called to Ruth after breakfast. She walked the edge of what had been Sarah's domain. Rows of nothing but dried stalks, earth baked hard as brick. The storm 3 nights ago had helped some, but not Clear's throat enough. Then she saw it. There under the dead bean vines, green shoots pushing through, volunteers, plants that had seeded themselves from last year's crop, waiting underground like secrets. She knelt in the dirt, cleared the dead matter with her bare hands. The soil underneath was darker, while still holding moisture from the storm. More green shoots, definitely squash, maybe pumpkin. Hard to tell yet when they were just cotyledons reaching for sun. "What are you doing?" Margaret stood behind her. Egg basket balanced on her hip, the few eggs they'd gathered rattling lonely in the bottom. "Finding what's left." Margaret sat down. The basket knelt beside her without being asked, started pulling dead vines, her hands working careful around the volunteers. They worked down the row quiet-like, revealing more survivors. Definitely squash, some tomato plants that had receded wild, even carrot tops poking through like green feathers. "Mama ordered seeds," Margaret said sudden. "In February, before she got real sick, before the baby came too early." "Where?" "In her secretary desk. Top drawer." She was planning for summer. Ruth stood wiping dirt on her apron. She'd taken to wearing Sarah's aprons now. Nobody saying otherwise. They walked to the house, Margaret leading her to the parlor Ruth had barely entered. The secretary desk stood against the far wall, walnut wood gone dull without oil. Margaret opened it careful like something might break or jump out. Inside, papers tied with ribbon, letters with addresses Ruth didn't recognize, a bottle of ink dried to crust, and there in the top drawer, seed packets, at least a dozen never opened. DM Free and Company, Detroit. The date printed clear. February 1880. Tomatoes, beans, 3 kinds of corn, squash, melons, even flowers, marigolds and zinnias. Sarah planning for a season she'd never see. She always planted marigolds with the tomatoes. Margaret said it kept the hornworms away. Her mother taught her that. Ruth fingered the packets. Good money spent here. $3 at least, maybe $4. Money James probably didn't have to spare even then. "We should plant them," Ruth said. "It's late. Past proper planting time." Might not produce before frost. Might not. But sitting in this drawer, they surely won't. Margaret looked out the window toward the garden. Papa won't like it. He told Thomas not to touch Mama's garden, said to let it be. When? Right after when Thomas said we should plant the potatoes for eating. Ruth gathered the seed packets in her apron. Your papa's not thinking about eating. He's thinking about Mama. I know. He goes out there sometimes at night, just stands at the gate. They walked back outside. Thomas had joined them without being asked, Emma trailing behind, dragging her doll by its one arm. They stood at the garden edge, looking at the dead rose like a graveyard. Need to clear it first, Thomas said, practical. Then turn the soil, add manure from the barn. You know how? Watched Mama do it every spring. She'd make us help even when we didn't want to. Ruth found tools in the barn, hoe, rake, spade, all hanging neat on their pegs where Sarah had left them. The handles worn smooth from her hands, darker where her grip had been. They started clearing, working without talking much. Emma gathered the dead vines into piles, singing something tuneless. Margaret and Thomas pulled weeds that had grown up wild. Ruth turned the soil, breaking up the crust, revealing darker earth underneath. The sun climbed higher. Sweat soaked through Ruth's dress, making it stick to her back. Her hands already rough, split open where old blisters had been. She kept working. What are you doing? James stood at the garden gate, his face unreadable as a closed book. The children froze like rabbits. Ruth straightened, leaning on the hoe, feeling her back complain. Planting? I didn't tell you to plant. No, you didn't. They looked at each other across the turned earth. Ruth could feel the children holding their breath, waiting to see which way this would go. That was Sarah's garden, James, Clear's throat said, his voice flat. It's dirt with things trying to grow in it. You don't understand. I understand hungry children come winter. I understand good seeds going to waste. I understand your wife spent money on these seeds, expecting them to get used. She held up the fairy packets. James's face changed when he saw them. Something flickering across it like heat lightning. His wife's handwriting on the label. Spring Garden, 1880. Clear's throat in her careful script. She's gone, Ruth said softer now. But your children aren't. They need food. They need to see things can grow after dying back. They need... She stopped, looked at the three small faces watching. They need something to tend to besides grief. James turned and walked away. Not to the house, to the barn. They heard hammering start up, violent and rhythmic. Is he angry? Emma whispered, clutching her doll tighter. I don't know, Ruth said, honest. But an hour later, when the sun was straight overhead, Thomas called out. Look, James coming from the barn carrying lumber across his shoulder. He set it down by the garden, went back for more. Board by board, he built frames for raised beds. Didn't speak. It just measured twice, cut once, hammered nails. True. The children watched, uncertain what this meant. Gophers, he said finally after the third frame was done. Raised beds keep the gophers out better. Your mother always wanted raised beds. He built 4 frames before dinner, his shirt soaked through sawdust in his hair. After they ate cold biscuits in the last jar of Sarah's peach preserves, he went back out. Ruth followed, found him standing over Sarah's rosebush by the front porch. Dead canes, no leaves, thorns gone gray. She loved that rose, he said without looking at Ruth. Brought it as a cutting from her mother's garden in Kentucky. Wrapped the roots in wet burlap, kept it damp all the way here in 78. Ruth knelt, examined the base, scratched the bark with her thumbnail. Look here, green underneath, it's not dead, looks dead. Lots of things do, doesn't mean they are. They're just waiting. She got the pruning shears from the barn, cut the dead canes back to nothing, just stumps left ugly and bare like cemetery markers. Now it really looks dead. James said, wait and see. They planted the next day, all of them, even James. He turned more soil while Ruth and Margaret made rows straight as fence lines. Thomas built stakes for the tomatoes that would come. Emma dropped seeds, counting careful like Ruth taught her. 3 for melons, 2 for beans, 1 at a time for corn. Why different? Emma asked, dirt on her nose. Different seeds need different chances. Some are sure growers. Some need extra help to make it. Emma nodded, serious as church. Ruth watched her little fingers place each seed like they were precious, which they were. On last of Sarah's hope planted by other hands. By evening they'd planted half the garden. The Clear's throat empty half-weighted, but Ruth was out of seeds. She mentioned it at supper. Henderson might have extra, Margaret said. Or the Mercantile, Thomas added. Mr. Hutchinson usually has seeds, though they're probably old. No money for seeds, James said flat. Used the last for supplies yesterday. Ruth had $17 sewn in her corset still. Her running money, she'd always thought of it. But running where? She looked at the children's faces, excited about the garden for the first time since she'd arrived. I have a little saved, she said. James's head came up sharp. No, it's just sitting there. I don't take charity, not from anyone, especially not from, he stopped, from hired help. The words landed between them like stones and water. The children went still. Ruth felt the distance clear as day. She was the hired help who happened to share their table. Nothing more. Despite nights holding sick children. Despite working until her hands bled. That's not what I meant. It's what I am, though. $1.25 a week plus found. So let me buy seeds as part of the found. Food for the table. James pushed back from the table, walked out. The door didn't slam, just closed quiet. Somehow worse than slamming. He didn't mean it mean, Emma said, her voice small. I know. But Ruth felt the distance all the same. She was the help who happened to be there. Not family, not really anything except hands to work. She put the children to bed, came back to find James sitting on the porch in Sarah's rocking chair. First time she'd seen him use it. I have to pay you back, he said to the darkness, for the seeds, if that's what you need. It's what's right, what's proper. She sat on the step looking out at the garden in moonlight. The turned earth looked black as coffee. Sarah wasn't supposed to die, he said suddenly. She was the strong one. Knew just what to do with sick animals, birthing troubles, anything that needed tending. But when her own sickness came, he stopped. I failed her. Sickness doesn't care about supposed to. She was carrying another baby. Did you know that? Ruth thought of the tiny gown in the sewing basket. I guessed. Lost it in February. The bleeding started and wouldn't stop. That's what weakened her. Then the fever came and she couldn't fight it. Ruth said nothing. Nothing to say to that kind of hurt. I shouldn't have gotten her with child again. Emma's birth was hard. Doctor. Morrison said to wait. Maybe not try again, but you loved her to death. The words hung there, bitter as spoiled milk. That's why, he said, why I can't, why this has to stay business. I can't do that again. Watch someone. I understand. Do you? Ruth stood, brushed dirt off her skirt. I understand enough. Good night, Mr. Hartley. She went to her closet room, shut the door, sat on the narrow bed in the dark. Through the thin wall she heard him come in later, moving careful not to wake the children, heard his door close. Then that sound again, muffled crying, trying to be quiet. She pulled Sarah's apron off, folded it neat. Tomorrow she'd wear her own dress, her own apron if she could find where she'd packed it. Keep the lines clear. Hired help, nothing more. But then she heard it. Emma coughing upstairs. Not sick coughing. Just the leftover rattle from her fever. Still, Ruth found herself standing, listening. The cough came again. She opened her door quiet, started for the stairs, met James at the bottom, both of them frozen in the dark. I heard, they both said at once. Stopped. I'll check, Ruth said. We'll check. They climbed the stairs together, found Emma sitting up in bed, Margaret rubbing her back in circles. Can't stop coughing, Emma wheezed. Ruth felt her forehead. Cool. Listen to her breathing. Clear enough. Just irritation left over, need some honey and warm water. They all trooped down to the kitchen. Ruth mixed honey and warm water while James held Emma. Margaret and Thomas sat at the table, everyone pretending this was normal, gathering in the kitchen at midnight. Emma sipped the honey water, coughing less. Will the seeds grow? She asked between sips. Most will, Ruth said. What about the ones that don't? That's why we plant extra to make up for the ones that don't make it. Emma considered this. Mama planted us. We grew. James's arms tightened around her. Now we need to plant new things, Emma continued. Since Mama can't. That's right, Ruth said. Emma looked at her father, then at Ruth. Both of you together. That's how gardens work best. Mama always said gardens need two people, one to plant and one to tend. Children in their truth, simple as water. Ruth caught James's eye over Emma's head. Something passed between them. Not love, not yet, maybe never, but understanding. They were both here, both needed, both planting what they could in ground that had seen too much dying. Back to bed, James said soft. They tucked the children in again. Ruth turned to go to her room, but James caught her sleeve. Buy the seeds, he said. Well, figure the money later. Ruth nodded. They stood there in the dark hallway, his hand still on her sleeve. Then both heard it. Margaret crying, trying to muffle it in her pillow. Not the leftover cough, real crying, deep and harsh. Mama, she was saying over and over. Mama, I tried to save you. I tried. The letter came on a Tuesday. Ruth saw the dust trail first from where she stood at the washtub, mail retider coming harder than usual, earlier than expected. She set down the wash paddle, wiped her hands on her apron, her own now, not Sarah's. She'd found it packed in the bottom of her carpet bag. The rider didn't even dismount, just leaned down from his horse to hand James the envelope from Zanesville, Ohio. Unmarked, urgent. Ruth's stomach dropped like a stone in water. Zanesville. Her sister Mary lived there with her husband Edmund. James brought the letter to where she stood by the washtub. Thomas's grass-stained shirt still in her hands. It's addressed to you. Black bordered paper. Death in the family or close to it. Ruth's fingers shook taking it. She recognized Edmund's cramped handwriting. He'd never liked her much. Made that clear when she lived with them those 3 months after P died. Want me to? James started. I can read it. She broke the wax seal. The word swam, then steadied. Your sister has taken ill with consumption. Doctor says weeks, perhaps days. She asks for you. Can you come? We'll send travel money if needed. Edmund Peterson. Ruth folded the letter, put it in her pocket, went back to scrubbing Thomas's shirt, odd working at the grass stain with lye soap that burned her cracked hands. Bad news? James asked. My sister's dying. The wash paddle slipped. She grabbed it, kept scrubbing. The grass stain wasn't coming out, probably never would. You need to go, James said. Do I? She's your sister, your blood. She's the one told me I was too plain to stay in her house after P died. Said I'd scare off suitors for her daughters. Said I was a burden no man should have to bear. Ruth wrung the shirt hard, water streaming through her fingers red from the lye. Now she's dying and wants me there. Probably to mind those same daughters while she does it. Ruth. First time he'd used her given name. They both noticed it hanging there between them like wash on a line. I have work here, Ruth said, not looking at him. We managed before. No, you didn't. The truth of it sat there plain as day. James looked toward the house where Emma was singing to her rag doll, where Thomas was practicing his letters at the kitchen table, where Margaret was mending her father's shirt with stitches Ruth had taught her. How long would you be gone? Clears throat. Don't know, consumption's slow dying sometimes. Could be weeks, could be months. The children would have to manage. She hung Thomas's shirt on the line. The stain still showed, but fainter. Started on Margaret's dress, the one with blackberry stains from yesterday's picking. The children had come home purple-mouthed and laughing. First time she'd heard Thomas really laugh, not just smile careful-like. I'll think on it, Ruth said. But that afternoon, while the children napped, she found her carpet bag under the narrow bed, and started folding her few dresses. The gray one she'd arrived in, the brown one, uglier if possible, the black one for church she'd never worn here. Each dress uglier than the last. Mary had always said, "No wonder you're a spinster, Ruth. You dress like you're already buried." What are you doing? Emma stood in the doorway of Ruth's closet room, ragdoll hanging from one hand. Just organizing. But Emma saw the carpet bag. Her face went white as fresh paper, then red as fever. She ran screaming through the house like something was chasing her. "She's leaving! Miss Ruth's leaving! Her bag's out! I saw it!" Feet pounded on stairs like thunder. Thomas and Margaret crashed into the small room, saw the evidence plain as day. Margaret's face closed up tight as a fist, but Thomas, who'd barely spoken for months, grabbed Ruth's arm hard enough to hurt. "You said you'd stay. I said I'd try. You're just like all of them, Mama. The baby that didn't come, now you." His voice cracked on the last word. "Thomas, that's not." But he was already running. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle every window. Margaret stood frozen, Emma wailing in her arms like the world was ending. "Is it true?" Margaret asked, her voice steady as she could make it. "You're leaving?" Ruth sat down the dress she'd been folding. "My sister's sick, might be dying." "So?" The coldness in Margaret's voice cut deep as a winter wind. "She's family," Ruth said. "We're not, though. We're just a job, just work, just nothing." Margaret turned, carrying Emma, who was sobbing so hard she was hiccuping. Ruth stood alone in the closet room holding her ugly black dress. I'm feeling like she just kicked a dog that trusted her. James found her there 20 minutes later, still holding that same dress. "Thomas is in the barn. Won't come out. Won't answer me. I'll talk to him." "No, this is..." He stopped, started over, his voice different. "You need to go to your sister. The children aren't yours. You made that clear." Snorts. $1.25 a week plus found. "Just business, you said." Ruth felt each word like a slap across the face. "You're the one who said it had to stay business." "I know what I said. Doesn't make it easier." He walked out. Ruth heard him calling Thomas, voice patient but tired. Heard Emma still crying upstairs. Heard Margaret in the kitchen banging pots louder than necessary, probably making supper since Ruth wasn't doing it. She finished packing, set the bag by the door, found paper and pencil. Mom started writing instructions. How much willow bark for fever. When to plant the late beans, which hens were best layers. How Emma liked her hair braided. Her handwriting looked shaky as an old woman's. She tore it up, started again. Supper was silent as a funeral. Thomas wouldn't come in from the barn. James took him a plate. Emma wouldn't eat, just pushed beans around her plate, making patterns. Margaret served and cleared without looking at Ruth once. "I haven't decided for certain," Ruth said finally. "Yes, you have," Margaret said flat. "Your bag's packed. You're just waiting for morning to leave, just like Mama waited till morning to die, like she didn't want to bother anyone by dying at night." Ruth had no answer for that. She barely slept, lying on the narrow bed, fully dressed. On every sound made her think one of the children needed her. But they didn't call, didn't come. Even Emma stayed away, though Ruth could hear her crying on and off all night. Morning came gray and humid, the kind of day that promises storms later. Ruth made breakfast, biscuits with Sarah's recipe, the tablespoon of sugar making them just right. Nobody ate much. James hitched the wagon without being asked. "Stage comes through at 10 o'clock, he said, not looking at her. Ruth nodded, went to get her bag, but it wasn't by the door where she'd left it. She searched the closet room under the bed behind the door. Gone. Looking for something? Thomas stood in the kitchen doorway trying to look fierce, but his eyes red from crying. "Where is it, Thomas?" "Don't know what you mean, Thomas." He broke. Young face crumpling like paper. "Threw it in the pond. Oh, thought if you didn't have a bag, you couldn't leave. Stupid, I know, but I thought, oh, Thomas." She reached for him, but he backed away. "We were doing good. The garden's growing. Emma's better. Papa don't cry every night no more. We were almost normal. Why you got to ruin it?" "I'm not trying to ruin anything." "Then stay." 3 pairs of eyes on her now. Even James, standing by the stove with his coffee, watched her, waiting. The letter in her pocket felt heavy as lead. Mary dying, maybe already dead. Edmund's cramped handwriting asking her to come. Blood family calling, but Emma's small hand slipped into hers. Not pulling, just holding, trusting she wouldn't let go. "If I stay," Ruth said slow, measuring each word, "things got to change." James straightened. "What kind of change? Can't be just hired help anymore. Can't be wondering every day if you'll send me packing these children." She stopped, swallowed hard. "They're getting attached. I'm getting attached. That's dangerous if I'm just temporary. What are you saying?" Ruth pulled her hand free from Emma's, needing to think clear. I'm saying either I belong here or I don't. Can't be halfway. Can't be $1.25 a week pretending we're not becoming something. Something, James repeated. Family. Emma said, clear, Isabel. We're becoming family. The word sat there in the kitchen like a live coal too hot to touch. Families don't always work, James said carefully. My family with Sarah ended. I know everything ends, but that don't mean we don't try. Margaret moved closer to her father. Mama would want us to try. James's face did something complicated. You don't know what she'd want. Yes, I do. Found her journal. Everyone turned to stare at Margaret. She lifted her chin, defiant. Where? James asked, voice dangerous. Quiet, her sewing basket hidden under the fabric scraps. Margaret pulled out a small leather book from her apron pocket. She wrote about the baby, about being scared, about her voice wobbled, about wanting us to be happy after if something happened. James reached for the journal. Margaret gave it over reluctantly. He opened it and Ruth saw his hands start shaking. Out, he said rough. Everyone out. The children scattered like quail. Ruth started to follow, but James caught her wrist. Not you. You read this. He thrust the journal at her. Read what she wrote, then decide. He left, door closing hard behind him. Ruth stood alone in the kitchen holding Sarah's journal. The leather was worn soft, like it had been handled often. She opened it. Sarah's handwriting, neat and slanted right. Dates starting from Christmas. December 25th, 1879. James gave me paper and this journal for Christmas. Says I should write my thoughts. What thoughts? That I'm afraid? That I lost too much blood when Emma came and Dr. Morrison said another baby could kill me. That I'm already carrying that baby and haven't told him yet. Ruth sat down hard, kept reading. January 10th, 1880. Quickening today. The baby moves like butterfly wings. I haven't told James, he'll worry himself sick. He still has nightmares about Emma's birth. Wakes up calling my name, though he thinks I don't know. January 28th, 1880. Ordered seeds from Fairy Company. Planning for spring I might not see. If something happens, I hope someone plants them. The children need to see things grow. Need to know life keeps going. Ruth's throat got tight. She turned pages. February 14th, 1880. Bleeding started this morning. Just spotting, but I know what it means. The baby's in trouble. I'm in trouble. Should tell James, but can't bear to see his face when he realizes what's happening. February 15th, 1880. Blood won't stop. Sending Thomas for Dr. Morrison. James holding me like he can keep me here by grip alone. Sweet man, good man. Deserves better than watching me fade like his mother did. February 20th, 1880. Lost the baby yesterday. A boy, perfect and still. We buried him by the oak. No name. Couldn't bear to name him. Bleeding slowing. But I'm so tired. Children keep asking when I'll be better. Don't know what to tell them. March 1st, 1880. Fever now. Comes and goes like waves. And James tries to hide his fear, but I see it. Started writing letters for the children to read when they're older. Trying to tell them everything I won't be here to say. Trying to explain that dying isn't leaving, it's just going ahead. March 10th, 1880. Good day today. Sat up, ate soup, talked to James about what comes after. He won't hear it. Says I'm getting better. We both know I'm not. Made him promise to find someone for the children. Someone practical. Someone who will love them for who they are, not trying to replace me. Someone plain maybe who won't expect too much. Who will understand that broken doesn't mean worthless. Ruth's hands shook now. The last entry was March 13th, 2 days before Sarah died. March 13th, 1880. Dreamed about the woman who will raise my babies. Couldn't see her face, but her hands were gentle, her strong. Our working hands. Told James about her. He said I was fevered maybe. But I think she's coming. I think she'll find them. Pray she'll be brave enough to stay when it gets hard. Pray James will be brave enough to let her. Pray my children will remember me, but not let my memory keep them from loving again. Clears throat. The journal ended there. Ruth closed it. set it on the table. Through the window she could see James by the barn, Thomas beside him. Finally, Margaret had Emma in the garden, showing her how to tell weeds from vegetables. Normal morning things, except nothing was normal. Ruth picked up the journal again, read the last entry once more. Pray she'll be brave enough to stay. She walked outside. James saw her coming, straightened. The children stopped what they were doing, watching. I read it, Ruth said. And she looked at the four of them. Broken people trying to heal. Her kind of people, maybe. My carpet bags in the pond. Thomas nodded, ashamed now. Then I guess I'm staying. Emma shrieked, ran full tilt into Ruth's legs. Thomas let out a breath he'd probably been holding all night. Margaret smiled. First real smile Ruth had seen from her. James just looked at her steady. What about your sister? Ruth pulled the letter from her pocket, tore it in half, then quarters, let the pieces fall like snow. Mary made her choice when she turned me out. These children didn't choose to lose their mother. Sometimes you got to pick which hurt to tend to. She turned to go back to the house, start the day proper. But James's voice stopped her. Ruth, she faced him. This changes things. You know that. I know I can't. I'm not ready for what Sarah and I had. I'm not asking for that. They stood there, understanding flowing between them without words. Not love yet. Maybe never love like he'd had with Sarah, but something. Partnership, purpose, choice. $1.25 a week is still all I can pay, he said. Don't want your money anymore. His eyebrows rose. Then what? Ruth looked at the children already heading back to the garden, at the house that needed tending. At the man who needed time to learn to trust again, want what Sarah wanted, to see things grow, to be here for it. She walked away before he could answer, but heard him follow. Heard Thomas asking about fixing the chicken coop roof, heard Emma singing, heard Margaret saying something about preserving day coming soon. The torn letter blew across the yard. Ruth didn't watch where the pieces went. Mary would die without her. Edmund would be angry. Her nieces would manage. But these children who weren't hers by blood, they needed her here. And maybe that was enough. Maybe needing was its own kind of belonging. She started washing the breakfast dishes, hands deep in hot water. Through the window she saw James watching her. When their eyes met, he touched his hat brim. Not a smile, not yet, but acknowledgement. Then Ruth saw it on the fence post by the garden. A red bird, cardinal, male, bright as blood. Sarah had written about cardinals in the journal, said they meant visits from heaven, said when you saw one, someone dead was checking on you, making sure you were all right. The cardinal tilted its head, looking straight at the kitchen window, at Ruth's. Then it flew to the oak tree, the one where the baby was buried, and there at the base of the oak, Ruth saw something she'd missed before. A small stone, and beside it, an even smaller one. 2 graves, not one. Dawn came cold for October, cold enough that Ruth's breath fogged as she walked to the garden to check for frost damage. The squash leaves drooped but hadn't gone black, still alive barely. She pulled her shawl tighter, the one Margaret had given her yesterday, said it was Sarah's, but Sarah would want her to have it. She heard boots on gravel before she saw him. James stood at the garden gate, 2 cups of coffee steaming in his hands. Thought you'd be out here, he said. She took the cup, grateful, her fingers aching from the cold. They stood quiet, looking at the garden they'd built together these past weeks. Odd tomatoes heavy on the vine, beans ready for another picking, corn stalks rustling dry. Everything they'd planted from Sarah's seeds had grown. Need to harvest today, Ruth said. Frost coming tonight for certain. I can smell it. I know. But he didn't move toward the house to get baskets, just stood there, coffee cooling in his hands, watching her like she was a problem he couldn't figure. Something you need to say? Ruth asked. Been thinking about what you said yesterday about belonging. Ruth's stomach tightened. Here it came. The reason she couldn't stay after all. Too complicated, too soon after Sarah, too much like trying to replace what couldn't be replaced. I've been unfair, James said. Keeping you at arm's length but expecting you to care for my children like they're yours. They're not mine. No, but they could be. The words hung between them in the cold morning air. Ruth set her coffee cup on the fence post, kneading her hands free. They trembled anyway, and not from cold. "What are you saying, James?" He turned to face her full-on. His face looked older in the early light, lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth. "I'm saying Sarah's gone 7 months now. Children need a mother, legal and proper, not hired help, not someone who might leave when her sister gets sick or better offer comes along. That's why for the children, that's part why, and the other part." James set his own cup down, took a step closer. Ruth could smell wood smoke on his clothes, coffee on his breath, the soap he'd used to shave. "Other part is I can't sleep for worrying you'll leave. Can't focus on work for watching you with them. Can't." He stopped, jaw working. "I dream about you. It, James. Not those kinds of dreams. Dreams where you're gone. Where I come in from the field and you're not at the stove. Where the children call for you and you don't answer. Wake up with my chest tight as a closed fist." Ruth's throat closed up. She'd had the same dreams but opposite where James told her to go. Where the children turned away. Where she stood at the train station with her ugly carpet bag pulled from the pond. "I'm not Sarah," Ruth said. "I know that. Won't ever be pretty like her. Won't ever be." James's hand came up. Work rough fingers touching her cheek. First time he'd touched her deliberate with intention. "You think I care about Pretty? Pretty died on me. Pretty left 3 children crying in the night. Pretty's in the ground by that oak tree." His thumb traced her cheekbone, gentle as he was with Emma when she was scared. "You're here. You stayed through Emma's fever, stayed when I was harsh, stayed when you had every reason to go. That's worth more than Pretty." Ruth couldn't move, his hand warm on her face, his eyes steady on hers. Brown eyes, she noticed, dark brown with flecks of green. "I'm asking wrong," James said. He dropped his hand, stepped back, reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box worn at the corners. "This was my mother's ring. Sarah wore it. But before she at the end, she gave it back, said to give it to the next one, said I'd know when she knew. She knew I couldn't raise them alone. Knew I'd need someone." He opened the box. Simple gold band worn thin in places from years of wearing. Nothing fancy. A working woman's ring. "Ruth Brennan. Will you marry me?" Not for love. Maybe not yet, but for lasting. Young, for the children and for us. For building something from what's broken. Ruth looked at the ring, at James's face, so careful and scared both. At the house where she could see Margaret at the kitchen window trying to pretend she wasn't watching. At the garden they'd planted in dead ground that was now heavy with harvest. "I need to know something first," Ruth said. "What if I say yes? Am I wife or mother? Can't be both, but not neither. Children need to know what I am to them." James closed the ring box, thinking their mother's dead. "They know that. Can't change it, but you'd be their mama if that sits right. Different word, different person, not replacing, just adding on. And to you, wife, legal and proper. Share my name, my bed if you're willing, my life certain. I won't pretend I love you like I loved Sarah. That wouldn't be fair or honest. I'm not asking for that. What are you asking for?" Ruth picked up her coffee cup, cold now. Took a sip anyway, buying time to find the right words. "Respect, kindness, the right to be myself, not trying to be her." And she stopped. "What?" "The chance that maybe someday you might love me different, not like Sarah, but like Ruth." James nodded slow. "I can promise the first 3 certain. The last I think it's already starting. You think when you tore up that letter yesterday, when you chose us over blood family, something changed in here." He tapped his chest like ground thawing after hard freeze. Ruth felt her eyes burn, blinked hard. "That's enough for now." "Is that yes?" She held out her left hand, watched him slide the ring on. It fit barely. Would need adjusting, but it stayed. "Yes." James let out a breath that fogged in the cold air. His hands shook, putting the ring box back in his pocket. "When?" Ruth asked. "Just as Holcomb rides circuit next Monday, unless he wants something fancier. Church wedding. Monday's fine. Simple is fine." They stood there officially engaged, not sure what came next. Then the kitchen door banged open hard enough to scare the chickens. Emma flew out in her nightgown, bare feet slapping cold ground. "Did you ask her? Did she say yes? Are you getting married? Margaret said you were, but I didn't believe it. Margaret ran after her, trying to look dignified but failing. Emma, you weren't supposed to. We were supposed to wait. Thomas appeared from the barn where he'd clearly been spying, probably had been the whole time. Well, Margaret demanded, forgetting about dignity entirely. James and Ruth looked at each other. Ruth held up her left hand. The ring catching morning sun. Emma shrieked loud enough to set the rooster crowing, launched herself at Ruth's waist, arms wrapping tight. Margaret followed, more careful but hugging too. Even Thomas came close, let Ruth pull him in with one arm. You'll be our mama? Emma asked into Ruth's apron. If you'll have me every day, every single day, forever and ever, long as the good Lord allows. James stood apart, watching. Ruth reached for him over the children's heads. He took her hand, squeezed once, let go. Breakfast, he said gruff, then harvest frost tonight for certain. They walked to the house together, children chattering like magpies. Emma wanted to know what dress Ruth would wear. Margaret offered her mother's pearl hairpins again, the ones Ruth had worn for the first wedding. That didn't happen. Thomas asked if he should polish James's good boots. Normal things, family things, almost. But at the kitchen door, James caught Ruth's elbow, leaned close enough she felt his breath on her ear. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For saying yes when you could have said no. When maybe you should have said no. Ruth turned to answer, but he was already past her, telling Thomas about fixing the barn roof before winter. She touched the ring, still foreign on her finger. Through the window she saw Sarah's rosebush by the porch, the one she'd pruned to stumps. New green shoots pushed up from the base, not many but some reaching for sun despite the coming frost. Miss Ruth, Margaret stood in the doorway. I mean, what should we call you now? Ruth's fine until Monday. After that, Mama, Emma said firm. After that, your Mama. Ruth nodded, and throat too tight to speak. Followed them inside to start breakfast. Salt, pork, and biscuits, same as every day. But James set out Sarah's good plates without being asked. Margaret picked late wildflowers for the table, purple airs from the roadside. Thomas filled the water pitcher full without being reminded. Small changes, everything changing. Ruth rolled out biscuit dough, adding that tablespoon of sugar like Sarah's recipe said. Behind her, James read from the almanac about frost dates and harvest moon. Children argued gentle about who would stand where at the wedding. Through all the morning noise, Ruth heard something else, silence where crying used to be. James hadn't cried last night, first night since she'd arrived without those muffled sounds through the wall. She shaped the biscuits, set them in the oven, and turned to find James watching her. Something wrong? No, just you look right there at my stove in my kitchen. Sarah looked better. Sarah looked different. You look right. Before Ruth could answer, Emma tugged her skirt. Mama. Almost. Will you teach me to make your biscuits? They're your mother's recipe, but you make them. That makes them yours too. Now, child logic, simple and true. Ruth smoothed Emma's tangled hair, felt the knot Sarah would never comb out. After breakfast, we'll make a double batch for the week. For the wedding week, Emma corrected. Wedding week. Ruth touched the ring again. Real. This was real. She served breakfast, family chattering around her, but through the window she saw movement by the oak tree, by Sarah's grave and the smaller one beside it. That cardinal again, bright red against brown grass. But now there were two, male and female, paired, watching the house, watching her. Ruth turned away, focused on the living, but couldn't shake the feeling. Sarah checking on them, making sure Ruth would do right by them. I'll try, Ruth whispered, too low for anyone to hear. The cardinals tilted their heads like they heard anyway, then flew off together toward the rising sun. But as they flew, Ruth saw something else, a rider approaching on the main road, moving fast, too fast for good news. James, she said, someone's coming. He stood, looked out the window. His face changed, went careful and closed. That's Sarah's sister from San Antonio. Ruth's stomach dropped. Sarah's sister who hadn't come for the funeral, who hadn't written since, who was writing up now just when things were settling. Did you write to her? Ruth asked. Tell her about us? James shook his head. Haven't written to anyone. The rider came closer, a woman in black sitting straight as a ruler on her horse. "Papa?" Margaret's voice had gone small. "Is that Aunt Catherine?" The rider wasn't Sarah's sister. Tom Henderson reined up hard, his horse leathered white with sweat. "Justice Holcomb's here early," he panted, still in the saddle. "At our place now," P said. "Tell you if you want marrying, better come quick. He's only staying till noon, then heading to Austin." Ruth's hand stilled on the dish towel. Monday was 3 days away. She wasn't ready. Her good dress was still at the bottom of the pond with her carpet bag. The house needed cleaning. The children weren't prepared. "We'll come now," James said. "Now?" Ruth turned to face him. "But I'm not. The children aren't now or next month. Or he won't be back sooner." Ruth looked down at herself. Work dress stained with breakfast grease, hands rough from lye soap, hair barely pinned for morning chores. This wasn't how she'd pictured it. Not that she'd pictured much, but she thought there'd be time to prepare proper. "Give us an hour," she told Tom. "Tell the justice we'll be there." The boy wheeled his horse around, galloped off trailing dust. The kitchen erupted. "Your dress!" Margaret ran for the stairs. "I'll get Mama's blue." "No," Ruth said firm. "Not Sarah's clothes." "But you don't have anything nice," Emma said, then clapped both hands over her mouth. "I have my black dress. It's clean." "That'll do." "You can't marry in black," Margaret protested. "It's bad luck, like wearing mourning to your own wedding." "Then it'll match how this started." Ruth went to her closet room. He pulled out the black wool dress, plain as a fence post, high collar, not a bit of trim anywhere. She'd bought it for her father's funeral. Now she'd marry in it. Seemed fitting somehow. One ending leading to another beginning. She washed at the basin, scrubbing her face and hands with the last sliver of store-bought soap, braided her hair tight, pinned it severe. The black dress still fit, though loose at the waist from all the hard work and simple meals. A soft knock at her door. "Ruth." James's voice, uncertain as she'd ever heard it. She opened the door. He'd put on his Sunday suit, the one he'd worn to bury Sarah. His hair slicked down with water, beard trimmed neat as he could manage with shaking hands. The suit hung loose on him too. Grief had whittled them both down. "You look," he stopped. "I know how I look." "No." "Oh, you look like yourself. That's good." "That's right." Margaret appeared holding something wrapped in tissue paper. "These were Mama's," she said, unwrapping pearl hairpins delicate as frost. She wore them at her wedding. I want you to have them." Ruth's throat closed tight. She took the pins with careful fingers, worked them into her severe braid. They caught the light, the only pretty things about her. "Beautiful," Emma breathed. She wasn't looking at the pins. She was looking at Ruth's face at the way. Trying not to cry made her eyes bright, cheeks flushed with emotion. "We should go," James said. They loaded into the wagon. Thomas had brushed the horses until they gleamed, braided their manes with ribbon he'd found somewhere. Emma clutched a handful of late asters and goldenrod from beside the road. Margaret carried Sarah's Bible marked at 1 Corinthians with a blue ribbon. The ride to Henderson's took 20 minutes. Nobody talked much. James drove steady, Ruth beside him on the bench, trying not to wrinkle her black dress. The children in back dressed in their Sunday clothes, patched and mended but clean. The Henderson place came into view. 3 other wagons already there. The Millers, the Brennans from Down Valley, the Schmidts from the German settlement. "Words out," James said. "Does that bother you?" "No, let them see. Let them know you're ours now. Ours. Not mine. Ours." Mrs. Henderson met them at the door, face unreadable as limestone. "Justice is in the parlor. You certain about this?" "We're certain," James said. They filed in. Justice Holcomb sat behind Henderson's good table, paper spread out, ink pot and pen ready. A thin man traveled hard with eyes that had seen too many quick marriages and quicker regrets. "Mr. Hartley, this the bride?" "Ruth Brennan," Ruth said, speaking for herself. The justice studied her, the morning dress, the work-rough hands, the plain face made plainer by the severe hair, then looked at the children, Emma already pressed against Ruth's skirt. "You know what you're taking on?" he asked Ruth. "I do." "And you too, James? You ready for this again?" James's hand found Ruth's. First time they'd held hands proper. his fingers cold as winter creek water, hers steady. "I am." "Then let's proceed. Stand here, both of you." They stood before the table. The neighbors gathered behind them as witnesses. Mrs. Henderson held Emma up so she could see. Margaret and Thomas flanked James and Ruth like small honor guards. Dearly beloved. On Justice Holcomb began, then stopped. "Actually, let's keep this simple." Clear's throat. "You both know why you're here. This is a marriage of necessity and choice. That right?" "That's right," James said. Ruth nodded. "Miss Brennan, you take this man and his children for better or worse, knowing the worse has already been pretty bad." "I do, Mr. Hartley. You take this woman as wife and mother to your children, promising to treat her with respect and kindness." "I do." Rings. James pulled out the gold band already on Ruth's finger from this morning, slid it off, then back on again. "Official now. By the power vested in me by the state of Texas, you're married. Kiss her if you're inclined." James turned to Ruth. She saw his uncertainty. Too many people watching. Too much history between them and this moment. She raised up on her toes. Or pressed her lips quick to his cheek, enough to seal it, not enough to promise what wasn't there yet. "Sign here," the justice said. Ruth wrote her name for the last time as Brennan. Her hand shook a little. James signed after her, his hand steadier. Margaret and Tom Henderson signed as witnesses, their names careful and proud. "That's done then," Justice Holcomb said. $1 for the service." James paid. They turned to face the neighbors. Mrs. Miller was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Mr. Schmidt nodded approval. Mrs. Henderson watched Ruth sharp, like she was taking her measure. "Cake at my place," Mrs. Henderson announced. "Can't have a wedding without cake." They moved to the Henderson kitchen. Applesauce cake appeared from somewhere. Coffee poured strong and black. Emma sat in Ruth's lap, telling everyone who'd listen. That's my new mama," pointing at Ruth like she might disappear if people didn't look quick. Ruth ate cake she didn't taste, smiled at congratulations that felt strange. James stood across the room talking with the men about winter wheat and cattle prices. Already separate, already back to normal, except for the ring weight on her finger. "You'll make him happy," Mrs. Henderson said quiet beside her. "I'll try. Sarah was my friend. Knew her since we were girls in Kentucky." Mrs. Henderson's voice carried warning. She was special. "I know. Do you?" She could sing like a meadowlark, could make roses grow in drought, could gentle a spooked horse with just her voice. Ruth set down her coffee cup, met Mrs. Henderson's eyes straight. "I know she's dead. I know 3 children need raising. I know a man needs help keeping body and soul together. That's what I know." Mrs. Henderson studied her long. "You're not trying to be her. No point trying for what I can't be." "Good. That's good." Mrs. Henderson squeezed Ruth's shoulder, gentle now. "Sarah told me once near the end, she wasn't afraid of dying, just afraid of leaving them alone. Now they're not alone." The party wound down as the sun got high. Chores waited. Animals needed tending. They loaded back in the wagon, the Hendersons waving from their porch. The ride home felt different. Ruth was Mrs. Hartley now. These were her children. Legal. This was her husband beside her. "You sorry?" James asked sudden. "About what?" "Quick wedding, no fuss, black dress." Ruth looked down at her funeral dress, already dusty from the wagon. "Dress doesn't make the marriage." "No, but women like nice things for weddings." "I'm not most women." "No," James agreed. You're not." They pulled into their ranch as the sun hit noon. The house looked different somehow. Not better or worse, just hers now. Her responsibility, her home. "Chores," James said, same as always. They scattered to regular work. Ruth started dinner. Margaret fed chickens. Thomas helped James with the horses. Emma set the table using Sarah's good dishes without asking permission. Normal day. Except Ruth was married now. Except the children called her mama when they wanted something. Except James would expect what? Tonight in Sarah's bed. Dinner was quiet. Everyone tired from the excitement and the emotion. Emma fell asleep in her chair, face nearly in her plate. James carried her up. Margaret and Thomas followed without protest about early bedtime. Ruth cleaned the kitchen alone, listened to the house settle around her, or waiting for James to come back down to say something about tonight, about their wedding night. He didn't come down. She finished dishes, banked the fire, checked the doors, making sure they were barred proper. Still no James. She climbed the stairs, heard him reading to the children from Psalms, the 23rd, about still waters and restoration, his voice steady and low like any other night. Ruth went to the end of the hall. The door to Sarah and James' room, their room now, stood closed. She opened it quiet. Nothing had changed. Sarah's brush still on the dresser with her dark hairs in it, her blue dress on the peg. The wedding ring quilt smooth and perfect, the pillow on the left side still holding the indent of her head. Ruth backed out. Couldn't sleep there. Not tonight, maybe not ever. She went back to her closet room. Started unbuttoning the black dress, heard footsteps in the hall, stopped. Knock on her door. Ruth. Yes, we need to talk. She opened the door. James stood there looking lost as a child. About tonight. I'm sleeping here, Ruth said. In my room. His shoulders dropped. Relief or disappointment? She couldn't read which. That's probably best for now. For now, Ruth agreed. They stood there. Married people not sure how to be married. The children are happy, James said finally. Yes, you did good today with them, making it seem natural. It is natural for us. James nodded, turned to go, turned back. Ruth, thank you for staying, for this, for being you. It's my life too now. He reached out, touched her cheek quick and light as that morning in the garden, then left, footsteps heading downstairs, not to their bedroom. To his chair by the cold fireplace where he'd sat every night since Sarah died. Ruth closed her door, changed into her nightgown, plain cotton, worn soft, lay on the narrow bed that was still hers alone. Married, but alone. Mother, but not wife. Something, but not everything. Through the thin wall she heard Emma cough once, twice. Not sick, just the leftover rattle from her fever weeks ago. Still, Ruth found herself standing, listening, no more coughing. Her children now, legal and proper, her family, her life. She touched the wedding ring in the dark, still foreign, still strange but real. Tomorrow she'd move some of her things to the big bedroom, not to sleep there, but to make it theirs instead of Sarah's. Take down the blue dress, pack away the brush, put her own brush there, plain backed wood without silver or pearl. Small changes leading to bigger ones. For now she lay still, listening to her family sleep. Her family. The words sat strange in her mind like new shoes that needed breaking in outside. Wind picked up that frost, James predicted. She should have covered the tomatoes. Too late now, but there would be other seasons, other plantings. Time to get it right. She was Ruth Hartley now. The sound of it in her mind like a bell. She was learning to ring. Tomorrow she'd start learning how to be that person. How to be wife and mother both. Tonight she was just Ruth, lying in the dark, wearing an old wedding ring, listening for children who might need her. And somewhere in the house, her husband sat alone, probably thinking of another woman, another wedding, another life. But that was all right. They had time. Seasons of time. The house creaked, settling for night. Ruth closed her eyes, touched the ring once more, then heard it. Footsteps on the stairs, slow, heavy, coming toward her door. James stopped outside. She heard him breathing, heard his hand touch the door, wood creaking slightly under his palm. Ruth, barely a whisper. You awake? She sat up, heart beating hard. Yes. Can I come in? Ruth stood, pulled her shawl around her nightgown, opened the door. James stood there in his nightshirt, looking younger, somehow vulnerable. I can't sleep, he said. Keep thinking about Sarah, about how she'd feel about today, about us. What do you think she'd feel? He was quiet so long, Ruth thought he wouldn't answer. Relief, he said finally. She'd feel relief that we're not alone anymore. Any of us. Ruth reached out, took his hand. Come sit, just sit. We don't have to, just sit. He came in, sat on the edge of her narrow bed. Ruth sat beside him, their hands still linked. Tell me about her, Ruth said. Tell me about when she was well, when she was happy. And he did. Talked until his voice went hoarse. About Sarah's laugh, about how she'd dance in the kitchen when she thought nobody was watching, about how she'd sing to the chickens to make them lay better. Ruth listened, held his hand, let him grieve proper with someone there. When he finally stopped talking, the clock downstairs chimed 2. I should go, he said. Stay. Just sleep. Nothing more. But stay. He lay down on top of the quilt, still in his nightshirt. Ruth lay beside him, on top of the covers too, not touching except for their hands. They fell asleep like that. Married but careful, together but separate. Starting something that would take seasons to grow. Outside, the first frost of winter settled on the garden, ending some things, starting others. And on the fence post, barely visible in moonlight, 2 cardinals sat side by side, watching, waiting, then flying off together toward tomorrow. Sometimes at church socials or quilting bees, I watch folks lean in when someone tells this story about Ruth who thought she wasn't fit for any man, about James who thought he'd never heal, about 3 children who needed both a mother's love and permission to remember the one they'd lost. We recognize ourselves in every careful gesture, every held-back tear, every moment when choosing to stay feels harder than leaving. My grandmother told me this tale when my husband died, when I thought I'd never smile again. She said, "Love isn't always passion. But sometimes it's just showing up with ugly dresses and work rough hands, making biscuits with someone else's recipe, learning to be family with people who weren't yours to begin with." We pass this story through Texas towns and beyond because it tells us true things. That second chances don't erase first loves. That broken people can build something whole. That gardens grow best when tended by those who understand that everything beautiful was once just seeds in dead ground, waiting for someone brave enough to believe in next season's harvest. Note, this story is inspired by frontier tales of resilience and redemption created solely for entertainment purposes. It does not condone, encourage, or promote any form of violence or harmful behavior. All characters and events are products of the author's imagination. And any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental. Köszönöm, hogy a végéig meghallgattátok. Nagyon értékelem minden pillanatot, amit itt töltöttetek velem. Jelenleg az első célunk felé haladunk, az 1000 feliratkozó felé. Ha a történetek, amelyeket mesélek, akár csak egy kicsit is megérintettek benneteket, kérlek támogassatok azzal, hogy rákattintotok a feliratkozás gombra, és hagytok egy lájkot. Minden feliratkozás és minden kedvelés hatalmas motiváció számomra, hogy tovább írjak és új, izgalmas történeteket készítsek nektek. Találkozunk a következő videóban.